Technology partners are the unsung growth heroes. This is Partner-Led Growth, a show dedicated to empowering partners to discover the solutions their clients need while growing their ability to take their own revenue to the next level. Your host, Ben Spector, a passionate member of the MSP community for over a decade, will help you navigate the growing partner ecosystem. Partner-Led Growth is sponsored by Zomentum, the revenue platform transforming the partner sales ecosystem, one solution, one vendor, one partner at a time.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today on Partner-Led Growth, the podcast. I'm your host, Ben Spector. Today's guest is an exceptional leader, a certified expert in cybersecurity with over 20 years of experience on the cutting edge of the industry. He's the Senior Vice President of North America at Nord Security. It's David Nuti. David, thank you so much for joining me today.
Ben, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Pleasure. Well, let's get straight into it. A lot of MSPs are trying to figure out how to add the second S to become MSSPs. What is the biggest problem facing MSP owners going on that journey today?
Yeah, I've been enabling partners in this category for some time now, and you start with the initial barrier is that security can be intimidating. It's a credibility risk if you don't know what you're talking about and how to engage in these categories. So many partners have been hesitant to engage on them at risk of their own credibility. And then also historically, it's been a difficult management solution. It's been a very kind of legacy hardware-based, heavy lifting gear. Where do I deploy technology? And it's really moved itself, as we've seen so many other things, into a managed service as a service, OpEx models as opposed to CapEx and hardware rotation models. So coming up to speed on those options has been one of the challenges as well. But they're maturing and they're coming to fruition now.
And so when we talk about sort of coming up to speed on those opportunities, obviously you work with NordVPN, which has a portfolio of solutions to help them with that. But what's the biggest challenge there? Is it an educational problem?
I think education is certainly a part of it, and at Nord Security, NordVPN is one of the solutions on the business side of things for our MSP partners. There's NordLayer, NordPass, NordLocker, and we can get into those along the way. But education is absolutely at the forefront. They need to understand what the options are and understand not just nuts and bolts, hardcore security configuration talk track with their customers, but really understanding the macro level challenges that businesses face today when it comes to just the sprawl that is a truly effective security strategy. And working with partners to deliver those outcomes for customers is now becoming a really viable option for MSPs, as opposed to trying to cobble together multiple point solutions and orchestrate those, where very few high-level companies on their own can do that on their own without use of a partner like an MSP.
That makes complete sense. So the MSP is trying to transition to MSSPs. The biggest challenge in your view then is finding that coherent set of solutions that enables them to deliver that additional S.
The S, that added S, is very, very valuable to an MSP to be able to insert that in. And here's the great news on that is that you're seeing security merged into existing conversations that MSPs are already having with their customers. So, and what I mean by that is we're in a world where the platform approach to solving problems is taking over the idea of doing best of breed on a per solution basis and ending up with 30, 40, 50 different suppliers that are supposed to be orchestrated. They're now looking to partners that can deliver a cohesive set of solutions that are already orchestrated for them and delivered as a service to achieve outcomes quickly, rather than launching into years-long construction projects that can leave an end user really disappointed at the end.
I think that orchestration of multiple tools is one of the things that's really key to it. I think one of the biggest challenges, even outside of security, that most MSPs and technology partners are probably facing is that inevitable sprawl of SaaS solutions. There's a sprawl of solutions within their clients that they're trying to grapple with. There's the sprawl of solutions within their own business that they're using to manage and to monitor those clients. What can they do to reduce the sprawl that's going on within their own businesses then?
Well, I think the key thing, it may be a tired example, but it's still the grand champion of analogies, is the smartphone in your pocket. All right, consider that as an option and look back in the not too distant past and what that used to look like. My first job was an indirect distributor reseller in wireless services, back in the mid 90s. I'm aging myself on that. But back at that period of time, as time evolved, it wasn't uncommon that you were carrying, one device for data. You were carrying another device for GPS. You were carrying a paging device. You had of course your telephone, and I used to love my little digital camera I'd carry along with me. And Convergence and as a service, eliminates sprawl. By definition, is the two great disruptors in technology is convergence and as a service. That I'm able to do more things with one solution than I was before, and you're going to manage the complexity out of it for me, because you're doing at an expert level the orchestration of what used to be fragmented, separate pieces of technology, and you've now delivered them in one already unified, orchestrated, well put together service. And that's been the nature of the area of business that I've been in. And it's fun as an MSP to come in as a disruptor and look at someone's existing sprawl and asking, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Do you really want to do this? I've never engaged with a customer where they love having to try to pull together orchestration, service chain together, 10, 15 different third-party solutions. It's extremely challenging. Very few can get over that hump. So the time of the MSP to add that second S, I don't think has ever been stronger than it is right now.
I love the way you talk about convergence and as a service as being these big disruptors. I think it communicates a really complex set of ideas that we all talk about every day, really, really nice and concisely. And we've certainly seen it in technology. In the communication side of technology. Voice platforms have been talking about converged communications for years. But I think it's quite interesting now to start looking at that concept within the other industry, or not the other industries, but the other parts of the service that MSPs and technology partners are having to deliver.
Yeah, I think if I look at I can give a couple examples in recent history that points directly at what I'm talking about. In October of 2018, Gartner launched a category that they referred to as SASE, S-A-S-E, Secure Access Service Edge. And what that talked about is the convergence of security and network technologies, not as a product. You don't go buy a SASE box from someone, but as a framework and as a strategy, with the understanding that you can't have these technology footprints siloed anymore because they're so dependent upon one another. In security, you're considering every edge node access point, and that goes even beyond now the identity of a user, but the variety of devices that they're using. You can have a single user that uses a computer, their phone, a tablet, they're at home, in a coffee shop, in the office. The variety of ways in which they are connecting, the locations, the connectivity methods, and the application destinations that they're going to, which could be in the cloud, it could be a SaaS, it could be a self-hosted application. That variety of endpoints puts an unbelievable burden on a security responsibility for a company. And how in the world do I get a unified policy, not only around security, but networking, how they're accessing them in a single footprint? And so when Gartner introduced that category, it kickstarted a lot of conversations and had a lot of companies, including our own, really dovetailing into looking how we can converge what have traditionally been separate network operations and security operations into single solutions that allow you to have that type of tool set already integrated, available on demand, and able to stand up in minutes, as opposed to weeks and months long projects. That's just a tremendous amount of innovation that's taken place. And the other example that I would give on that would be if you look at what Microsoft is doing, and getting an E5 license in Microsoft. You can retire as many as 16 or 17 different individual security solutions if you fully leverage the licensing that you probably already have in Microsoft. And many people don't realize that. So they're taking that, much of this conversation around, best of breed is dying, best of platform is rising, originated from me a few years ago with a lot of conversations with Microsoft, where they realized in certain areas they weren't best of breed yet, but they said, we have the best platform, and you give us time and we will catch up to best of breed in the individual categories within our platform. And then we'll leave it to the customer to decide if they want to go do that on their own, or if they'd rather deal with a platform that's already done that for them. And over the last few years, I've seen the direction that bet is going in, and it's to the advantage of the MSP that can deliver platforms like that.
Understanding what Microsoft 365 capabilities really are, I think, is a really interesting one. Because if I look back to my knowledge of 365, and I guess very few of our clients were using E5 licenses. Most of them were probably using E3, or when it came out, Microsoft 365 Business Premium, because they do start to pile in some of the more basic security. But I think there's definitely a real knowledge gap within a lot of these MSPs wanting to become MSSPs as to what those real capabilities are. They're really complicated platforms.
They are. And I mean, the good news for the MSP is they're really complicated platforms to the IT leaders also. So they're really complicated for just about everyone. And it doesn't require the ability to open a control panel and start configuring security strategy and putting in, SIM and SOC and MDR playbooks. That's not the value, but it's just understanding at a macro level what those challenges are, and being able to coordinate a response for the customer to deliver those outcomes. It's really remarkable that in that Microsoft environment on an E5 license, most customers just don't understand the totality of what they get inside of that license. And when they do understand it, they realize they can actually shave off a ton of expense on things that they're trying to do on their own, an individual platform, with something that they already have available. Like there's a full-blown SIM in there, there's EDR in there, there's email gateways. And I don't want to turn this into a Microsoft conversation, but it very much is, you can really differentiate yourself as a value-added partner to your customer by being able to articulate some of these options that are available. I have nothing to do within the supply chain of Microsoft, but I consider myself an industry person first and a product person second. And that's the way, in my opinion, you really differentiate yourself, and you create a scenario where if you're across the table from a customer speaking at that level with them, which doesn't require a CISSP and security engineers, but if you have that conversation, they're probably not going to want to talk to anyone else but you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like what you say there about not wanting to turn this into a Microsoft conversation, because it's very easy, I think, when talking about SaaS these days. Everything, most MSPs and technology partners are deploying 365. They therefore expect most of the tools they're using to integrate or enhance 365 in some way. I think it might be helpful to take a bit of a step back from all of this and look at the evolution of security over the last few years. I think to a lot of the perhaps more traditional MSPs, there's still quite a strong fixation on traditional perimeter security. People are talking about firewalls, and offices need firewalls. And I think that a lot of people are still perhaps looking a little bit too far back and trying to differentiate themselves on providing this managed firewall service. How have things changed since then, and where do people need to be focusing their attention?
Like, security is it's a feedback loop, and firewalls are part of what I would call the prevention layer, and they're very important. And where you can have an interesting conversation around firewalls, where should it be? Does it need to be a physical box in my office that I stare at with blinking lights? Or is it better served being in the cloud right at the edge of where my applications are, where my workloads are? Typically, you like to have your security layer as close to your application destinations as possible because you allow for the least amount of activity between the security layer and where your information lies. And so cloud native security, which is a big part of the SASE conversation. In fact, it's a requirement bullet point within that description, is that it's cloud native, that when you can move your security layer to the cloud with firewall as a service and a managed cloud firewall, you create far more agility and scalability for yourself to deal with geographies, to deal with application destinations, traffic volume. Your scaling becomes much easier in that regard. So that prevention layer is entirely dependent upon the feedback loop of the monitoring layer. So firewalls don't catch everything. Firewalls are set up to catch what it knows it should be looking for. It is not set up to catch, inform you, or share any information with you whatsoever for anything that gets through on it. And that's where your monitoring technologies come into play. So your ability to see what firewalls miss is critically important today. And not only that, but when we talk about the last few years, I mean, obviously you talk about many organizations where an enormous amount of staff has left the physical office, and they're creating all that variety at the edge on it. 82% of companies have enabled bring your own device for their employees, and over half of them were willing to admit, I always like to say when it comes to security, especially to monitor or understand what the threats are that are coming from that. But they were forced into a situation where they had to remote enable employees. And for myself, who at that time was in the security operations center where we were doing threat hunting and MDR, and we had incredible automation to be able to filter out common traffic and elevate unique, 0-day unique occurrences that needed to be investigated by a human being. That was my fancy way of circling back to, we saw a 700% increase in attacks at the edge once bad actors became aware that there was that type of variability at the edge as a threat opportunity. And that's where what became so attractive when I made the move to Nord Security was being able to address those enormous gaps in a very quick and efficient manner at the edge. So that firewall component is important, but keep in mind that the firewall is one of those, on average, 40 suppliers that become the complete architecture of a security strategy. It's important, but there's far more nuance to it than that. And being able to explain that to a customer in that way is extremely important. It used to be that the value was deliver a firewall and help them do configurations, get them up and running. And there's still some value in that, but I think it's critically important to say that we're going to take care of the firewall piece, and that's a piece of an overall modern strategy today.
So if you were delivering sales training to our MSPs and technology partners and trying to help them transition from the firewall conversation to the edge security conversation, what if you had to give them a few sentences, what would you say they should be saying to their clients to get the point across without boring them?
I think a security conversation requires candor. It requires openness, and it's that oftentimes it's not an easy thing for a customer, because I see MSPs and our selling partners that go in asking the wrong questions of a security guy, and it stonewalls the conversation to nowhere land. I mean, the worst question I think you can ask someone whose responsibility is security, or where are your pain points on it, because what you're asking that person to do is tell you where they are failing in their job. And
or potentially asking them to explain something they don't necessarily know. I think too many MSPs ask their clients about things that they don't know exist or don't know can be solved.
Yeah. I sat on a panel just a couple of weeks ago in front of a huge room full of selling partners. And And one of them asked the question, what do you do when the customer says, I think we're fine, we're good? And my response to that was that the reason you got that answer is because you were asking the wrong questions, right? You've got to really turn this, and we were turning this into a sales training conversation, which I love, by the way. You've got to talk to someone in proactive terms. Like, what are your priorities around security? Where are placing priority in advancing your posture on security, and then commiserating on the known problems that are inarguable in the space. I work with customers every day, and they're dealing with this massive variety of endpoints and connectivity methods, and users can be anywhere, and new applications spin up and suddenly are being used in a day that you weren't even aware of because somebody signed a license onto, and all this dynamicism. How do you get a unified security and networking policy in front of every user to every application that they're accessing, where you have company corporate information? That's extremely challenging. I have that conversation with customers every day, and I haven't had that one with you yet. That's how I would approach it.
Sure, that makes sense. And a big question: is there a space? Is there room for fear in that conversation? Do you think fear should be a part of that conversation? Because I think a lot of the sales coaches over the last few years have, and not just the sales coaches, actually, a lot of the cybersecurity vendors have played really heavily on the educate your clients from a perspective of fear. And I'm not entirely sure I agree with that. What are your thoughts?
I mean, there's an endless supply of FUD content out there. I mean, every single day we hear about a breach. With Russia and Ukraine at the moment, as the moment that we're recording this. There were all kinds of alerts about being extra vigilant on security because there are now, aggressive overseas actors, and that's something that's always existed, and you can always turn to the market to provide you those, and I think it's well known, and even in the way that I propose the way to approach this conversation, the fear and the difficulty part is built in. Is that it's your responsibility to defend the organization, and you have an almost impossible task of dealing with a volume of attack, 60 million plus known bad actors that have been databased out there, and you're a team of 2, and you expect to be able to stand up to that on your own. It's just not possible. And that's where MSPs come in to bring in the good guys to even the fight with the bad guys. Why would you not, bring that force multiplier to your team and work with a provider that can solve those? So, because everything is at risk in a security, cybersecurity insurance and hope is not an effective security strategy. 60% of small mid-sized companies do not recover from a security breach when they have their entire customer database stolen or locked out from them, and their reputation destroyed in the marketplace because a bad actor uses their information to demonstrate that you've been compromised. So there's very little room for error, but it doesn't require an army of IT staff. It requires an MSP that can deliver a managed service that just delivers the outcome, the peace of mind, the reporting, the follow-up that an end company is looking for. I hope that answers the question. FUD is real. Like in security, It's always there. I think you have to be careful with how you use it, because you can create, an eye roll in the room that was unintended. So just know your audience really well, and that's a part of that candor in the conversation, and a willingness to embrace the reality of the challenge that's in place, and make that an open part. Because if you have a closed off customer that doesn't want to talk about these things, it becomes very difficult as a trusted advisor and partner to be able to recommend anything if I can't tell you what to do with your roof if I don't know the size of your house.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I think we should talk a little bit about what Nord brings to the table here. Elephant in the room, NordVPN. I think anyone listening to this who perhaps hasn't come across Nord more recently is probably thinking, that's NordVPN. They're the VPN guys. I was somewhat surprised as well when I came back across Nord Security more recently to understand that there is now, there's been a transition from that it's not about providing consumer grade VPN to get around Netflix. There's a hell of a lot more to what Nord is doing now.
A lot more. And that was why I joined the company, to be honest with you, because I had the same reaction that you did initially when I was introduced to Nord in this role. My response was, "What, the VPN guys? Why would I want to go do that? I'm in SOC and MDR, and I'm in the high value categories." And then I actually learned what we're dealing with here. So you're right. NordVPN is the grand champion of consumer VPN services. It's difficult to find a negative thing that anyone has to say. 15 million plus users, over 10,000 server on-ramps all around the world. One of the most attacked cyber surfaces on the planet, contributing, threat, collected threat knowledge and, information to the aggregate, white hats of security. It's a very, very robust company. But along the way, embedded within that user base, were business clients that were, to your point, trying to use a consumer type product, for remote users within their environment, and they asked for more. They wanted more capability. They saw on the horizon being able to deal with on-ramping for applications, for cloud native security policy, more advanced malware, and protecting a user from themselves and where they go on the internet, but also being able to guardrail who has access through authentication and what they're allowed to access once they come in. So we talked about this SASE conversation, the convergence of network and security policy into a single platform, and that's Nord Layer. So embedded within the cloud, I now have the ability with Nord Layer not only to multi-factor authenticate. I can use Azure, and I can use my existing identity management platforms to do my provisioning and my on-ramping. It integrates in very well, like you mentioned. It needs to, you got to be able to work with Microsoft.
Yep.
And we're certainly from day one in that category. But once I let Ben into the environment, what is his role in the company, and what is he even allowed to access? And what can he even see once in the environment? And that is that zero trust conversation, ZTNA, that is so aggressive, which, by the way, was included in the SASE strategy and platform, was to have a zero trust element built in. So now that allows me not only to authenticate and create security, protect, mask the user on the internet, make them essentially invisible, moving around online by being protected by the Nord layer, prevented from getting malware and malicious software pushed to the end device and compromising those. But now also, once you're in, I still do not trust you entirely as a user, and I'm able to restrict you to only the applications you need to use. So great example, salesperson comes into the organization, they can go to Salesforce, they can go to our document library for sales enablement, they can go to HR to do their expenses and their PTO management. They're not going to see or be aware of the existence of our financial platform, of our ERP, of our data analytics. You're able to configure access for individual users to only what they need to do to complete their job function, and then build in the requirement to do it. So this is that displacement of traditional VPN to what a business should be doing in the level of authentication for someone to come in, but then also being able to guardrail what they're able to see. And that takes care of the network and the security. This is the easiest way in the world to get the fundamentals in the path of a user, no matter where they are, what they're connecting with, how they're connecting to the applications that they're trying to access, without restricting what they need to just generally do on the internet, and being able to focus that in. And that's the Nord layer component of it. And then alongside of that is Nord Pass. And Nord Pass is password management. There was a company out of Canada that just got a nearly $7 billion valuation for password management. This is something that for MSPs, you go into your customers and you don't ask if they're using a password manager, you ask which one they're using. And for anyone who says we're not using one, it's, well, let's solve that right away.
Yep.
80% of breach comes from compromised credentials. That's where it starts, is someone has been compromised on their user information. 80% of the time, that's the reason for it. And a enterprise or business password management solution allows an IT administrator, number one, to solve that problem, take care of your biggest threat vector, and then also give your organization a way to share credentials and have shared access to information without having to share the password for actually accessing it. So I have a huge list of passwords and environments within my NordPass password manager. I don't know what those passwords are. And the best part is that's what makes it ultimately secure. There was a member of our team had a great line, said, if you're smart enough to remember your passwords, it's because you're not secure enough. And
I like that.
That's what a password manager does, but it extends it at an organization level, gives the IT administrator a chance to see where are my at-risk passwords, who's reusing passwords. Without the IT administrator can't see those passwords. Neither can we. It's a zero knowledge architecture. But an individual user needs one master password to get into a vault that has their system created passwords that are the most confusing things. On the planet, choose a number of characters rather, and it generates it for you. It's a real fundamental piece of technology that an MSP should be taking to literally every single one of their customers. There isn't a use case outside of this scope, and the moment is right now in that category. And then we're coming on the tail end of that with NordLocker. And NordLocker is secure end-to-end storage, same device file encryption, file sharing for device backup on it, but also encrypted, keyed, file sharing. So for us, we have this suite of solution that takes care of the network and application access, the credentials, and the storage in a suite of solutions that can stand independently, but then also are part of a suite of solutions underneath the Nord Security umbrella.
Putting the NordPass bit a bit aside for a moment, because I suspect of those three solutions, the one that people understand the best is the password management. So if we look at NordLayer and the NordLocker, taking this back to the original conversation of what do the MSPs need to be able to do to move to MSSPs? Blunt question. Can you already do most of the stuff that Layer and Locker do natively in 365? Obviously, we've got your conditional access stuff built into it. We've got the BitLocker control and things. And to me, that it sounds like you could theoretically do a lot of this natively within 365.
You could set up application defenses. So 365, for the most part, is set up for application defense, which is important. What they're not effectively used for, which I used to orchestrate, 365 in with remote user access solutions, edge technologies at office endpoints, like everything that Microsoft does is in their cloud, and you're choosing a destination for that technology deployment, almost in a physical sense, but it's in the cloud. So where are your applications? Where's your hosting? Let's set up that security environment there. For NordLayer, our infrastructure is cloud native. It's already global. It's set up no matter where you are. You're able to on-ramp into NordLayer on it and have that cloud native layer that's multi-tenant and designed for light lifting software clients on an end device that protects the end user all the way back to the edge device. So we are something that is very complementary to what is happening. I haven't had a single conversation on the NordLayer side where I'm competing with built-in capability around Microsoft, but rather we are safely enabling the utilization of those services for users no matter where they are on it, and it rides alongside that. Like, they have Sentinel as a SIM, for example. We're not going to do SIM and threat hunting, et cetera. But the log information from a NordLayer is a valuable part of that, that ingestion and telemetry that those platforms use, but never seen as a kind of a competitive option. If I were to look at legacy, someone has Cisco AnyConnect or something along those lines, something in the traditional VPN vein where they have a VPN concentrator and they're managing it themselves, and they're realizing that having everyone come into a physical device from everywhere in the world or across the country is it doesn't work well. It's not practical. It doesn't scale well. Moving these things to the cloud where you're no longer managing that technology is the difference maker when it comes to layer. And from a viewpoint, we have I think we're pushing towards 6,000 companies that are using this already. And it's such a rapidly growing ecosystem. And I think what they enjoy the most, what our MSP partners enjoy the most, is that on a very first call with a customer, you can have them up and running in NordLayer. It's that fast. The customer says, hey, I think I'd like to try that. The response to that should be, great. Do you have an extra 15 minutes? Let's get you up and running.
And I think that's kind of why I asked the question, because there's a lot of this stuff that you can do natively in, some of the big enterprise platforms like 365. But the golden ticket for MSPs wanting to become MSSPs is the manageability and the ease of deployment. So I guess even the things that overlap with the native capabilities of 365, actually the ease of management that Nord brings to that, the global view. I'm astonished that with 365, it's only recently that they've released the Lighthouse experience, the kind of multi-tenant management. Before that, there was absolutely no visibility into all of your clients' tenants. And so I'm guessing one of the things that Nord really brings to the table is that multi-tenant management, the ability to deploy policies more globally across your clients, and therefore allows those, let's call them novice MSSPs, the ones just making the transition, to deploy enterprise level security, but without having to have their own enterprise level knowledge.
I think you make a great point. Multi-tenancy is so important, and then to the advantage, preceding NordLayer was NordVPN. So you have a company that was able to spend a decade mastering multi-tenancy and efficiency when it comes to individual users and designing platforms that can scale up and scale down in real time, maybe as efficiently, if not more efficiently, than just about anyone on the planet. So all of that experience, there are other companies out there who offer these types of aggregated cloud native services, and they've built them from the ground up, in some cases in response to Gartner saying you should be doing it this way in 2018. And those companies are now starting to spin up. They haven't had a decade worth of 15 million users to learn the nuance on how you scale something like that in real time. And that's the advantage of NordLayer. You not only have the benefit of 5,000 companies that are already using this thing today, if I fast forward today, but you also have all of the aggregate knowledge and experience that came from delivering on a per user basis from the NordVPN consumer side, which still continues to grow like a rocket ship for us today.
So I think clear conclusion here on the NordVPN bit is you're still offering the NordVPN product, but it really isn't part of that core the business grade solutions that Nord are now bringing to the partner channel.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you go watch a PewDiePie video and he may tell you that it's brought to you by NordVPN, and you're an idiot if you're not using one. So it's just become a very blunt conversation on the consumer side. And it goes beyond, you mentioned it, the Netflix enthusiast that lives in the US and wants to see, hey, what are they showing in Germany this week that they're not showing? And that still exists, which put a burden on us to understand how you make sure performance is at a premium as well. If you're going to be streaming video content for someone in Los Angeles who wants to look like a user out of Frankfurt, you got to understand how to handle throughput and performance. And we are, I think it was Norton commissioned a bake-off between VPN providers. We had nothing to do with the competition, and blew everyone else out of the water on performance. So it's always been a critical piece that user experience. There's a lot of conversation around CX these days and customer experience and onboarding and what does it feel like. That has never left the priority landscape here at Nord. We understand that as robust and impressive as the core technologies are for NordLayer, and it continues to evolve on the feedback of our customers coming inbound, it means nothing if it isn't simple to deploy and unobtrusive to the end users that are utilizing it, that it works into their natural workflow of every single day. And an IT, but it also has built in the requirement to use it. So in the case of NordLayer, a remote user in my organization can't get to the applications they need to use to do their job unless they come in through NordLayer first. It's the utilization is built in. And I've had so many conversations with IT administrators where they deploy technology, but nobody's using it. It's too difficult, or the performance is bad, so they end up turning it off. And I mean, and there's all your security vulnerabilities like right there in one conversation. In the case of NordLayer, the enforcement for utilization is built in, but you're doing it with a company that has always had a laser sharp focus on not only user experience, but beyond what the application looks, feels like, and that it's unobtrusive, but that the performance is fantastic also, and that there isn't a desire to shut it off because because I'm losing frames on a video, or it takes forever to download a file.
Cool, that makes sense. I wanted to talk a little bit about your background as well. As you know, as the listeners will know, podcast sponsored by Zementum, which is a sales and revenue automation platform. So the obvious question there is, can you tell us about your most memorable sale?
I'll keep the. I've run sales teams since I was 24 years old, and so that puts me well over 20 years now in doing this. And so, as a middle-aged sales leader, back in the old days where we used to, drive a car and park and knock on doors, make calls from yellow pages. There was no LinkedIn. There was no. I'm really aging myself here, and so I'm really digging deep on a fun sales story here. I was out on the road, and I had a salesperson call me in a panic who was being berated by a customer for a wireless experience that they weren't enjoying, and I could actually hear it in the background, and I happened to be 5 minutes away, and so I went over. It was a photography company. They take pictures of students, for student yearbooks and things like that. And I went in there, and the owner of the place, literally the guy whose name's on the door, is just tearing down one of my salespeople. And I insert into the conversation. And he essentially decided to turn the ire on me before I knew what it was. And in the moment, not getting vulgar or anything, but I met his volume level in front of his customers on that, to basically level the conversation. It's like, I think the key thing whenever you're working with customers is you don't want to be a vendor to your customer. Being a vendor is a bad place to be. It means that you are the submissive, and you're not at an equal level conversation with someone. And I think if you can demonstrate, an equal level passion in solving problems and getting to outcomes that they're looking for, you have a much better relationship, much more productive. That's who you get referrals from. That's who will fight for you when you achieve that level. So doing that in that moment, he stopped the conversation, had me go in the back. We disappeared for a minute. Voices were low, came down low, and we came out laughing, shaking hands and back on the right track, because we established a level of trust. And I point that as my favorite, and he grew business with us. And I point that out as my favorite because I think the look on my salesperson's face was the best thing ever. Is that, number one, couldn't believe what just took place, but also realized that they were working for someone that was going to have their back no matter what, and that I wasn't going to tolerate. So that turns out to be one of my favorites of all time, and I'll always remember my first sale, also selling Nextel to a forklift company in Northern California. Industrial lift truck. I don't even know if the company still exists today, in Hayward, California. It was my first outside sale ever in telecom. And Rick Gonzalez, probably wouldn't know me from a complete stranger, but I remember his name. He was my first buyer. And I think when you have that type of recall on your sales career, you just can't help but remain a guru in the space.
Yeah, what you said there about the relationship between, you don't want to be a vendor, I think is quite an interesting point. There's this obsession at the moment of vendors referring to their customers as partners. Now, personally, I kind of hate it, because I recognize as the customer that there's always this dominant relationship. And in a way, I get quite frustrated and almost find it patronizing when a vendor refers to me as their partner, when actually I know in reality, all it is, I'm just the customer. They don't really care. They just want my money. They want me to move on quietly. But it is interesting, and you're right. And I think we need to all look for ways to make those relationships more equal between vendor and customer. And it's both between the massive channel vendors like Nord and Zementum, and also the MSPs, the technology partners, and their customers. It doesn't really matter how big that size discrepancy is. I think we do need to see more of a level, respectful playing field.
And I think what's amazing is that that's what customers want. They want somebody to sit down and listen and actually take not
take an interest,
fake and not veil, but take genuine interest in what the outcomes are that they're trying to solve and the challenges that they have, and just solve these problems for me. Is customers love to buy, right? They love to buy because you're solving a problem for them that they haven't been able to solve on their own. And if you look at it from that viewpoint, it's you don't have buy reluctance. They're excited to solve the problem, and you're the one that did it. And this is something, and this, I always get a 50-50 response on that. I'll get an eye roll, and that's just cheesy. I'd never do it. Or I get other people who go, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to do that every single time. Is that, you want to know something that I never do? I never thank a customer for their business. I congratulate them on implementing the solution, right? Hey, congratulations. This is a great fit for you. This is really going to solve this, that, and this problems that we were working on. I'm really happy for you. And what's the customer going to do in that at the end of that exchange? They're going to thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for helping me out. I was like, that's what I'm here to do, is help you solve these things, and I look forward to helping you solve the next one. Right? I'm your advisor to get you to those outcomes. And someone, I didn't come up with it on my own. Somebody shared that with me many years ago. And if you want to exit a sales transaction with a customer at an equal level, that does it 100% of the time, and they will think of you first on the next time that they have something to solve. Again, it's so competitive out there. And these categories, I think we talked about it when we were leading up to this call, is that many MSPs come from the network, the infrastructure, maybe the communications piece of it, and they haven't been in the security piece. And one thing that we talked about earlier is that security is converging with networking, right? And so that means something very, very important also. It means that if you're coming at it from the networking side to move into the security categories, that means there's probably somebody in the security categories that's moving to try to go towards your network side. There's going to be a meeting in the middle of these, and you don't want to be on the outside of that when the entire industry is telling you these things are converging together. Go read the book, Who Moved My Cheese, right? is a classic quick read. I encourage everyone to read that one. Sold tens of millions of copies on it. But if you're relying upon the same sources of food, and you're not looking down different pathways and being aware of what else is out there, and going into these categories that traditionally maybe have been outside of your purview but are now coming in, realize that is happening from the other side as well. I tend to find that those in the categories outside of security operationally are better suited to absorb the security part of the conversation than the old school security, brick and mortar, shipping boxes, managing things, into the managed services side and converting a complete different operational model. So that's my coaching in, don't be on the sideline of what is happening, or I don't think you will like the outcome at the end of that path. Be aggressive looking into these categories. Now that's where a company like Nord Security comes in, so we can start helping you knock out some of these categories that you should be transacting with your customers on today. You're not, because you either don't have the confidence, you don't have the solution set, and that's those are the opportunities and podcasts like these to get that messaging out.
That has got to be single-handedly one of the best insights I've ever been given. And I've never looked at it that way, about equalizing the partnership. Congratulate your customer on signing the contract so that they then thank you, rather than saying thank you to the customer, which can only really trigger a "you're welcome" or something like that. But I love that. Congratulate the customer. And then that last point, really, really, really important. MSPs and technology partners have been complaining about the print and copy vendors starting to encroach on the IT. They're complaining, in the UK, our biggest telecoms company is a company called BT, British Telecom, and they've started over the last couple of years offering some level of IT support service, which has gradually gone from being consumer IT support towards business IT support. And I think they now offer, I think, Microsoft 365. So they're gradually encroaching on the businesses, given that they serve probably 80% of businesses with their phone systems in the UK. The fact that they're encroaching and charging £8 to £12 per user per month for that service, which is the equivalent of, I think, $15 to $17, something like that, compared to our MSPs and technology partners who are probably looking to charge $100 to $200 a month, it should be obvious to the customer why they're able to do it at that cost point, and that it is going to be a profoundly terrible service. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be in the middle of the conversation talking to them about, taking over the telecoms rather than letting the telecoms provider talk about taking over the IT. And it's exactly the same, you're right, with the security. Don't let the traditional security vendors start talking to you about taking over the networking. The traditional MSPs wanting to go on the MSSP journey, they need to be front and center of the conversation, building the relationships, letting their customers know that they're offering these services. It brings about that whole conversation of the importance of the QBR or TBR process, making sure that you're having those regular reviews with the customer and not treating it as a technology roadmap session, but really talking about a relationship, a sales and account management process. Anyway, I thank you very much for joining me today, David. I've really enjoyed the conversation and learned a lot. If people want to find you afterwards, how can they find you?
You can go straight to our websites and partners at nordsecurity.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, David Nuti, Nuti. Message me there. Easily accessible, but going to partners and whether you go to NordLayer, nordsecurity.com, nordpass.com, there are pathways for partners, for our MSPs to sign on as MSP partners. The management portals are available, live, matured, ready to go. You can literally start transacting same day in some of these categories by engaging with us, and I encourage everyone to do so.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. That's it, everyone. If you learned something today or laughed, please tell someone about the podcast. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. If you want to get more from today's show, check out the show notes and share this episode with a friend. Earn, grow, and manage revenue quickly and cost-effectively in the Zomentum Revenue Platform. To learn more, check out Zomentum.com. See you in the next episode.